Eleanor Aronstein attained both BS and MS degrees in education from Russell Sage College. She went on to attain a BA in history from Marist College and then a certificate of advanced graduate studies in educational leadership from Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. Her career has included coordinator of education at the Dutchess County Jail, social studies and Spanish teacher in the Hyde Park Central School District, an adjunct professor in history at Marist College, and supervisor of student teachers at SUNY New Paltz, Marist, and College of St. Rose. Eleanor's interest in the right to die stems from the very painful death of her mother in 1972 and her desire to help people avoid a similar end-of-life scenario. She became very active in Final Exit Network in 2013, giving presentations throughout the Hudson Valley and upstate area, and considers the work to be a tribute to her mother. With that, I present Eleanor Aronstein.
Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for letting me come and speak with you. Many of you have been to presentations before, so you know where I'm going, but I feel very joyful to be here at the ripe old age of 85, and I do cherish my life, but I also think ahead to how lives end. And so I've been very involved in two organizations that are near and dear to my heart. And I think because you're here, you probably share that orientation. So what we're going to do today is talk about end of life. I cannot believe this. I would kill students in my classes who did things like this. I don't even know how to turn it off. Take it. That was an oversight. I should have left that in the car. Okay.
So, as a reminder, anybody in the room that has their phone on, could you silence them?
So what we're going to do today is do an overview of the laws in this country and around the world of two organizations, both of which are very near and dear to my heart, and of things that you probably should be doing or probably have done, I hope, to prepare for your end-of-life scenario. Yep, go back to mom. Okay, so this is a picture of my wonderful mother. She was divorced. We were poor. She took care of me. She saw that I had the best education possible in New York City. We had City College of New York, to which I'm eternally grateful. My mother had nothing going for her in life except her purpose was to give me the opportunities that she never had. And when she was in her 60s, she developed ovarian cancer. I was in my 30s at the time. I had no idea how miserably a person could suffer before she would die. And I cannot tell you how traumatized I was by the 11 months during which my mother went from being this beautiful, hale, hearty, wonderful, vibrant human being to about 65 pounds of skeleton. And nothing alleviated her misery. Every place you could put a tube, she had a tube. And she never complained. She never said, help me, do something. It was I who felt my inadequacy when I talked to the doctors, when I spoke with the nurses. I had no skills to alleviate her suffering. And you can hear it in my voice. I'm still carrying that guilt. So that's why I'm here. And many, many, many decades later, my one dog in life, the dog that almost broke up my marriage because my husband said, you can't keep her. I found her as a stray. And I said, what do you mean I can't keep her? And of course, after 3 months, he accepted the reality. So she became our fourth child, and she was with us for 13 and a half years. And when it was obvious that Princess was at the end of her life, and her name tells you exactly where she fit in the family hierarchy, I took Princess to the vet. I held her in my arms. I sobbed, and the vet threaded a tube into her veins and put her to sleep, a euphemism, and she died. She died peacefully, and I thought at that moment, wow, this should be available to people. Now, that's a very radical thought. This was in 1979. So that was the genesis of my thinking about why do people suffer at the end of life? It's not necessary. So today's goals are to probably continue the conversation about a peaceful end, to talk about dying and the law, and the two organizations that I'm very, very attached to, and how you document your wishes. This is a human right, and human rights come in waves. Unfortunately, we're living in an era of regression, but in the 1920s, women got the right to vote. In the 1950s and 60s, when I was a young girl and a young woman, we had the civil rights movement, and I remember television images of human beings being attacked by shepherds, water hoses. We were not the great nation that we thought we were. In the 90s, disability rights groups. I think something happened to the sound.
Yes, it did. Sorry.
Okay. Sure. Is this okay? No.
Well, people online.
Oh, okay. I will speak loudly, and if you can't hear me, just wave at me or yell out, and I'll raise my voice. Okay. So disability groups became concerned about their rights, and we have now sidewalks with slopes. We have sidewalks with little lumps on them for blind people to feel, and all of these are good steps forward. And then around the turn of the century, we had the gay rights movement, which certainly was long overdue. Maybe the 21st century is the century for people to get the right to a death with dignity, a death without pain and misery and suffering. So we're going to look a little bit at death around the world, the United States, various states, and New York State. Switzerland is unique in that it has two services. You pay very dearly for them, but you can fly to Switzerland and have a very painless death. The Netherlands has long had euthanasia, and they have it for young people. They have it for mental and emotional illness. They've taken a lot of criticism for their extremely liberal approach to ending one's life, but they are certainly in the forefront. And the other countries, Belgium, Luxembourg, Canada has states, and it varies between the states in Canada. But very recently, Canada started to authorize medical aid in dying for people who are in extreme mental distress. And that's taking some flack. New Zealand, Spain, that's interesting because Spain was traditionally a very Catholic country. In the United States, 10 states and the District of Columbia currently have medical aid in dying laws. First was Oregon, and that was in the middle 1990s. It took a couple of years of litigation before the law became active, and in the over 27 years that it's been active, there have been no instances of abuse in any of the cases where people accessed the Oregon death with dignity law. All of the other laws are modeled very closely on Oregon's law. More or less, you must have two physicians certify that your condition is terminal, that you have an expected lifespan of 6 months. You must certify once or twice that, yes, this is what you want. And then you receive a prescription and you must self-administer. So this is an oral medication. There is no intravenous. I think in some states you can receive medication rectally if you have the inability to ingest. And the two most recent states to get this law are Vermont and New Jersey. And interestingly, Vermont does not have a residency requirement, which means that people in contiguous states or nearby states can go to Vermont, find a physician who will certify that they are indeed terminally ill, and they would qualify. The question of where they ingest the medication right now tends to say it better be in Vermont, because if it's in their home state and anybody is complicit in helping them get home or to Vermont, there might be liability and criminal charges. Okay, we can move on. So a little bit of humor. Oh, read my husband, who told me before, don't read the cartoons, now tells me to read the cartoons. As a dutiful, obedient wife of 66 years, I will now read the cartoon. Medical, yes.
Plus the people in the back are happy.
Okay, I can read. Medical ethics prevent me from assisting in your death. However, I'm allowed to keep you miserable for as long as possible. Unfortunately, that was my mother. Okay. So, what does New York law right now give you? You can accept or reject any treatments. You can determine how much treatment you want and when to stop the treatment. You can legally starve yourself to death in New York, but right now it is illegal to medically hasten the process. And I have to tell you, Compassion and Choices has been lobbying in New York for 10 years. It is a laborious process. Right now, New York State legislation, medical aid in dying, says if I am terminally ill, I should be able to choose to end my life calmly, peacefully, and in a dignified way at a time and in a setting I choose, where I am surrounded by those I love. That's what this bill is about. And there are the numbers of the bill. It is A995A, Paulin, and S2445A, Hoylman Siegel, and those are the people in the Assembly and in the Senate, the State Senate, who are the sponsors of the bill. Okay. And this is where we are right now. Okay. What does the New York State Medical Aid in Dying Act state? It states that a terminally ill person who has a prognosis of less than 6 months can apply for medication, which will end their life. You need 2 witnesses for the written request. It has to be notarized. You need doctors who are willing to prescribe the medication, and no doctor is forced to be a part of this. But right now, it's interesting to note about 67% of physicians in New York State are, if not supportive, sympathetic. So it's a majority. And no physician or facility is required to participate. It is a bill that is focused only on those who are medically vulnerable. It's got lots of built-in protections. It's very much modeled on the Oregon law, which has been in effect now for about 27 years with no instances of nefarious activity. It offers a compassionate option to people who are suffering. And most of the people who access this in other states are people who have cancers. It's supported by the League of Women Voters and various medical, humanitarian, and religious organizations. Okay. Okay. So what's happening with the bill? Well, it's stalled. It's very hard to get a bill out of committee onto the floor for an actual vote. Right now, that bill is blocked in committee. And when Compassion and Choices lobbies in Albany, as they will be doing next week, they are lobbying individual assemblymen and senators to get them to sign on as sponsors or supporters of this legislation. The organizations that are very active in doing this, Compassion and Choices, which is a national organization, End of Life Choices New York, which is a great local group, and Death with Dignity New York, which is another great local group. No surprise, working against this is the Catholic Church and Not Dead Yet. And in the interest of full disclosure, I will tell you, I'm an ex-Catholic. I know how powerful the Catholic Church can be, believe me. So, for those of you who can't see it, this wonderful lady is sitting next to her significant other and saying, physician-assisted suicide is just not natural. And I have to tell you, that horrible cartoon reminds me of my mother. Okay. So the organizations, they have their logos, Final Exit, Compassion and Choices, End of Life Choices, New York, Death with Dignity, and Hospice. And I'm throwing hospice in because sometimes it really works and sometimes it really doesn't. And we're going to talk about that. What do these organizations all do? They educate, they all provide wonderful materials. They lobby, they work with political action groups. And I have to tell you, that is very expensive. That's why I contribute heavily to Compassion and Choices. It's for their lobbying activities. They take the issue of death out of the closet. How many of you know friends or family members who will not talk about death? Absolutely not. And make no provision for it. It focuses medical attention on improving palliative care. And that's come a long way. We now have a specialty, palliative care medicine. That's a relatively recent addition. And it provides options. It attempts to put you in charge. So how should we die? The philosophy that I have is that the end of your life should deserve as much care and planning and beauty and respect as the beginning. We are all overjoyed when a new life comes into the world, and we are deeply saddened when we lose someone, but we are less saddened if we lose them compassionately. It is less miserable and less traumatizing if someone you love passes away serenely and peacefully in a manner that they want, rather than hooked up to tubes and being tortured. 80% of Americans would prefer to die at home, wherever home is. 60% die in acute care hospitals, 20% die in nursing homes, and only 1 in 5 actually manage to accomplish death at home. That's not a very good statistic. 72% of Americans at this point support the concept of medical aid in dying. That's a large growth from when it first came out, and people shrunk back in horror. I can remember talking to friends and neighbors, and they looked at me as if I had gone over to the dark side and become, a demon what are you talking about? People actively taking their lives? It's now mainstream. In New York State, hospice palliative care is available to anyone whose physician says they have a life expectancy of 6 months or less. What hospice can provide is spiritual, emotional care, hopefully pain-free comfort, but sometimes not. And we're going to talk about one particular case. And this is Amanda's story. Amanda is actually a lovely young woman who works for Compassion and Choices. And Amanda had a lovely partner who had been diagnosed with a brain tumor and opted for hospice. Hospice provided, I am having a senior moment here. What is the medication that morphine? Thank you. I should have thought of that. Morpheus, the god of sleep. So, but the morphine ran low, and on a weekend, the morphine ran out, and they could not access a physician to re-prescribe. And Amanda describes a 12-hour period where her partner writhed in agony. So it was not good. And that sometimes happens. In New York, Compassion and Choices has as its major objective the passage of legislation right now. And this has been a long battle, but they also have an information function and a wonderful packet on end-of-life planning. And I'm going to have to ask for a little bit of water. Can I go get it?
I'll get it.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I'm running a little dry. No, it's all right. Jesse's right here.
Our tech supporter does everything, right?
He does. He really does.
Okay.
Thank you.
Here's a glass if you'd rather glass out.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. If you've already taken the Compassion and Choices pretty blue and purple booklet, that's an end-of-life planning book, and it's very, very good. Okay, we can move on. Final Exit has a very different focus. I'm going to talk to you about what Final Exit does, and I'm going to be very selective in my choice of words.
Slow here, I'm sorry.
You're slow, it's okay. I'm actually going to read what they have sent me, and the reason I'm doing that is that I want to make sure I say nothing that would imperil the organization because they face litigation from hostile forces. Any competent person unbearably suffering an intractable medical condition has the option to die legally and peacefully. And our mission is to educate qualified individuals in practical, peaceful ways to end their lives, offer a compassionate presence at the bedside, and defend their right to choose. There are 3 components to that. One is a practical, it's educational, to tell a person what they need to do. The second component is to provide a loving, supportive human presence. And the third component is to defend their right to choose. And we're going to talk about how you go about protecting your right to choose. Zen believes managing one's death is a basic human right. And I believe it too. Okay, move on. Your end-of-life planning, think of it as an umbrella, and it has several components. It requires documenting your last wishes and sharing them with your family if possible, a close person who will be your support if possible, and probably a lawyer, because you really want this to be ironclad. Your documents, what are they? What have you done? If you asked most people in this country, do you have a living will? No. Do you have a healthcare power of attorney? No. Do you have a dementia provision? No. I see heads going up and down. Yes, bravo for you. But let me tell you, it's very hard to get people to move on that. Because once you make that move, you are acknowledging by actually making something solid and tangible that you're not going to be here forever. Sometimes I start these programs, I say, I want to see a show of hands. How many people think they're going to live forever? And, you know, it's a nice fantasy, and religion lets you buy into that fantasy. You live in another form or dimension. But the reality is nobody is here forever. So in New York State, there are 3 documents. There's your healthcare proxy, a living will, and a DNR. And you need to be thinking about what life-sustaining treatments might be imposed upon you if you don't have them, and occasionally are imposed upon you even if you do have them. Removing barriers to starting this conversation with family, friends, it's hard. I can tell you that talking to our oldest son about this, he's not comfortable. He knows where we are. He knows what we want. He's supportive. But the idea is hard. Thinking of your parents' death is not pleasant if you like your parents. Well, having 3 sons and running the whole spectrum of liking to disliking, I can tell you. Okay, next one. Okay. Oh, so you really have to think, who do you trust? Who can you choose? You document your wishes, you give copies of your documents to people. Who is going to be there to stand up for you? And you review and update this every year and a half, because your health changes, your feelings may change, your other people may change. And again, a cute little cartoon. Do you want me to read this, my Lord and Master?
Unless the people in the back can read it.
Can everyone see it? No, okay. Last night, my sister and I were sitting in the den, and I said to her, I never want to live in a vegetative state dependent upon a machine and fluids from a bottle to keep me alive. That would be no quality of life at all. If that ever happens, pull a plug. So she got up, unplugged my computer, and threw out my wine. So now we'll talk about the healthcare proxy form, the living will, and the dementia provision. And we will go back to the DNR. A healthcare proxy is the person who is going to speak for you when you are unable to make your wishes known, when you are vulnerable. And I will tell you, it happens sometimes when you least expect it. 4 months ago, I was a hale and hearty 85-year-old trotting around my neighborhood without a cane. And one day I went to visit a friend who got up, tripped, and fell on me and knocked me to the floor, and my hip fractured. So I was immobilized, and I am still recuperating from a freak accident. Well, I could have hit my head and been a little even zanier than I am now, and been in need of medical intervention where I couldn't express for myself. Do I have healthcare proxies? Absolutely. Do I have a living will? Absolutely. Do I have all the papers that I need lined up? Absolutely not. I still have one to do. Believe it or not, it's hard to do that dementia provision. Okay, your healthcare proxy doesn't have to be a relative. I personally want a pit bull. I want somebody who can stand up and say to the doctor, no more treatment. End it, make her comfortable. My husband can be a pit bull. He's a quiet pit bull. My oldest son is a very authoritative, comfortable adult who can do the same. And because I'm a little bit paranoid, and sometimes my son and husband and I are in the same car, I wanted somebody outside that tight little nucleus. And I went to a friend who happens to be a nurse, a retired nurse, but she's very, very strong. And I said, will you be my third option for healthcare proxy? And she said, absolutely. So I really have, checked off the boxes on that one. And they all have copies of the document, which has been notarized by, our lawyer actually did it. Okay. Your living will is a lengthier document, and there are lots of different forms, but you have to get one that's legal in the state in which you reside. So it says literally treatment by treatment, what you want if you become severely incapacitated. Do you want intravenous antibiotics? Do you want intravenous feeding? Do you want all sorts of things? And how much treatment and when to stop the treatment? Sample forms are available from these organizations, as well as the New York State Department of Health. For this, I really suggest you see a lawyer. Okay. Make copies. That's really important. Make sure you have one on you in your car. Make sure your healthcare proxy has one, your doctor has one, and the hospital in your area has one. I took mine to Ellis Hospital and they scanned it into my medical record. I do have copies in my car. I have copies in my pocketbook. I'm really concerned about this. So, you can never be too paranoid. Really. The DNR form, this I talked about last visit with my physician. In all my previous visits, when I talked about this with her, she said, not yet, you're not ready. This visit, she said, let's talk. And, that was kind of an eye opener. And I started the conversation by saying, I know what it involves. I know what these very hard chest compressions do. They can break your sternum. They can break your ribs. They can leave you severely physically compromised. And she said, yes, you're right. It's never a pretty procedure. And the thing that clued me into how forceful and brutal this procedure really is that I have a very close friend whose husband went into cardiac arrest, and she did authorize that he be brought back. And her daughter, who is a nurse, was horrified. She said, Ma, how could you do that to Daddy? And I was privy to this conversation. I thought, oh, it's not this gentle chest compression that we see in the movies. It's really pretty brutal. And I see a lady here wagging her head. I bet you're a nurse? No. Okay. So the dementia provision, both Compassionate Choices and FEN have excellent full form dementia provisions. It's many, many pages long. And it says, if you become incapable of being in charge of your health, this is what you want and this is what you don't want. And it focuses a lot on hydration, nutrition, and antibiotics. Okay, do you want to be left to linger or do you want to go quickly? Personally, I would like to go very quickly. So what should you do now? Well, I'm going to push real hard for taking action to support a death with dignity law in New York State. I think that's a critical provision. I will take a guess that most of you here have already started to protect yourself and have documents in order. And if you haven't, I won't embarrass you by asking you to raise your hand. But I hope I'll scare you into doing it. And I'm going to ask you to consider supporting Compassionate Choices and Final Exit with a check, but also by spreading the word to other people. It costs money for these people to hire lobbyists. It costs money for these organizations to provide the gentle presence for Final Exit, to fly people all over the country, to print these materials, to provide information so people like me can go out and talk to people like you. So yeah, I support them with checks. I wish I were a millionaire and I could give them a lot more, but I give them what I can, and I'm really urging you to do that too. So we're at the point where we will take questions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate all this.
You're very welcome.
So I have one question or comment in the chat.
Okay.
From Christy, who writes, Alzheimer's/dementia would seem to be impossible, but in that there is so much loss of dignity and fear attached to that illness. Early onset dementia runs in my family. It matters to me, brings me sadness. I will most likely have no choice even in my own death now. So not a question, but does the dementia form you talked about help set a stage for what happens if someone develops dementia or Alzheimer's?
Yeah, I really would urge people to look at the dementia provisions from Final Exit, and Final Exit and Compassionate Choices now both have what they call a supplemental dementia form, which is very, very detailed and designed to give you the easiest possible exit. This is probably a good time to say that there are certain neurological diseases which would preclude accessing the New York State Death with Dignity law if we ever get one. People who have Parkinsonism, for example, do not have a medical life expectancy of only 6 months. They can languish for years. People who have Alzheimer's or Lou Gehrig's disease, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, I think. Those people can languish and slowly diminish in capability so that they're tube fed and they're totally helpless, and they don't qualify with the 6-month provision. Those people should look to Final Exit because Final Exit is a different kind of support organization.
Okay, Christy, thank you for that. She didn't know about that provision. I have any questions? Yes. Go ahead. A gentleman here would like to speak. Take a microphone.
I'll get to you, Marlene.
It's worse than what you just said about.
Why don't you step in front of the camera so we can get online?
It's you started to get to it, but it's worse. Anybody who can't talk, anybody who can't write, anybody who doesn't have capacity cannot get the mercy that is intended by the bill pending in the New York State Legislature or any of the 10 jurisdictions in the United States.
Right.
My name is Alan Pfeffer. I'm a retired attorney. My daughter is 43 years old and is dying of Huntington's disease.
Oy.
I have seen many people with neurological diseases die. Okay. One of my best friends died on February 17th after an 8-year battle with ALS. Okay. A lot of people. 2 weeks ago, the woman 2 doors down from my daughter died from Huntington's disease. Okay. Aspirated pneumonia took her. I want to tell you a little bit about Canada. Canada has a much better program. Just to sort of summarize, California and Canada started their medical aid and dying programs about the same time, 2016. California and Canada have about the same number of people in their population. California, through 2021, about 3,000 people have gotten the mercy. Canada, 30,000 people. Okay. I talked to Compassion and Choices. They refuse to move off the Oregon model. They have one excuse after another. Canada is so different from the United States, their healthcare system, their population. Well, most of Canada is Catholic. Their health system only differs in the fact that they have a single payer. At the local level, they all compete. They have a capitalistic system among providers, whether it's doctors, hospitals, nursing homes, pharmacists. That's not government controlled. They only have a single payer. So how different is Canada? 6 months. What's so magical about 6 months? How did 6 months get into the hospice law where Oregon took it from? Well, Congress put 6 months in as a fiscal measure. Okay. In 1982, they wanted to limit the amount of federal money spent on Medicare. On hospice. So they put the 6 months provision in. It's got no rationality. It's got nothing to do with morals or ethics for how you should die. Canada does not have a 6-month provision. Canada, you don't have to ask. You just have to make a written request. And if you can't sign it, somebody else can sign it for you. Okay? Yes, you have to be 18. You do it. It does have to be voluntary. You have to have a serious and incurable illness, disease, or disability. I'm not sure about the mental illness. I did read someplace that they postponed that decision again until 27. You have to be in an advanced state of irreversible decline, and you have to have enduring and intolerable physical or psychological suffering that cannot be alleviated under conditions the person considers acceptable. In other words, in Canada, it's very individual. Okay.
Okay, great. So thank you for sharing that about Canada.
And
what can we do? So
where do I get that information? I'll talk to you later.
I have spoken to the governor's chief disability officer. The governor has not taken a position. I ask you to write the governor. We only have to convince one person, Kathy Hochul, who has people who died of ALS in her family. When I ask Compassion and Choices about ALS, they say, well, we're not going to do a healthcare proxy. By the way, everything that you said about a healthcare proxy is wonderful, but you can't use a healthcare proxy to access medical aid in dying in Oregon or in the New York bill. Okay, it's no good for that. Okay, so when I ask them, they say, oh no, we don't need to accommodate people with ALS because in Oregon, the second largest group to access medical aid in dying are people with neurodegenerative diseases. Well, those statistics are highly suspect. First of all, they're filled out mortality by the doctor. The doctor's in a rush. Does the doctor really care? Okay. I spoke with Mitch Greenlee a few years ago, who was the assembly chair of the health committee in Oregon. He was trying to get the Oregon law liberalized. And he told me that the way people with ALS are accessing medical aid in dying in Oregon is they're driving their wheelchairs into walls to push a plunger into their feeding tubes. And there has to be a better way. Okay. Right. They take the position that we have to do it incrementally. Well, why are we wasting so much political capital on a program and a bill that's going to benefit so few people? Let's spend our capital on a program that will benefit many, many more people. Okay, they say, well, if we can't get a narrow bill passed, how are we going to get a larger bill passed? Well, my answer to that is right now, the only neurodegenerative disease that is in support of having equal rights is the Huntington's people. Okay, 2 national Huntington's organizations have come out in writing in support of having equal access. The ALS people, the Alzheimer's people, they're on the sidelines. They got no skin in the game. Why should they risk their donations to take a position when they have no skin in the game? If they have some skin in the game, if their people can access medical aid in dying, maybe they'll support the bill. Why should they risk their donations if they have no skin in the game? So that's my answer to, a narrow bill versus a longer bill. I'm glad to talk to anybody afterwards. I wrote a brief to the Court of Appeals. When the issue came to the Court of Appeals, I testified before the New York State Assembly.
So
thank you.
I'd like to hear the speaker. So thank you.
Okay.
So can we have questions from anybody in the audience?
Wait, I want to comment on that gentleman's statements. He's speaking from the heart. He's speaking from a place of great pain and great frustration. And he's speaking because someone he loves is not going to have this option. And for that, we need to be kind and sympathetic and compassionate. I can understand that, but I'm going to counter that we'll take what we can get. And if it's primarily cancer patients who face a very definitive termination of life, who very often face a very painful end of life. If these bills can be enacted into laws and will benefit them, we will be happy to take that as a first step and hope that we can move on and include other people who deserve the same loving, compassionate, humanistic approach to end-of-life issues. I feel that person's pain. I can sense how agonizing it must be to view somebody with a neurological impairment who is excluded from this legislation, but it doesn't negate the value of taking the steps to get the legislation and then expand it. Sometimes we make progress incrementally, and this may be, unfortunately, one of those times. And I hope that's a kind and compassionate response. Yes, Arlene's been waiting.
Question, can you
Wait,
take the microphone?
wait, Arlene has really been waiting.
Okay, so first, wait.
Let her and
Wait.
What do you want to do? I want to know if my healthcare proxy and my DNR and my living will expire if I don't renew them. I mean, do you have to get new ones all the time?
No. They do not expire. They remain in effect unless you specifically withdraw them. But it is a good idea to look at them and renew them from time to time.
Okay, I've got a few comments. I'll come up.
So you're good right there.
Okay, I'm Julia Mao. I know many of you. I'm an author, but I have a lot of my personal experience with my husband's father. A few years ago, had to die in agony in a nursing home by refusing to eat because he had no access to any kind of right to die. So he took upon himself to starve himself to death. My own parents in 1970, my mother had a fall, which resulted in a subdural.
These are not questions.
And she was in a coma for weeks and
Julie,
finally came to.
We appreciate you. Speaker, do you have a question for our speaker?
Well, I'm also an expert. I don't think it only has to be questions.
Okay, well, let's
sorry.
Focus on the questions. If we
Anyway, my father reached the point he was going to the hospital with a shotgun and he was going to kill my mother and then himself because it got so desperate. That's one comment. I also run a home health care agency for years, but I tend to agree with the other speaker that more radical things need to be done. Yeah. Also, although I support what you're doing.
Thank you.
Okay. And I've written a novel, Elder Side. I ran a home health care agency.
You know, I hear the frustration and I hear the pain. And I too would like a more encompassing bill. I would like everyone who needs this help to be able to get it. But the reality is we are making very, very small steps of progress with the bill we have. And the bill we have has the 6-month terminal limitation. It can probably be expanded at some point, but right now, the Oregon bill is the gold standard. It's been in effect since, I think, 1995. And that's what we're looking at. And that's the reality. Yes?
Filling the gap is fair. That is why FEN is in existence.
Yes.
When you have a much more liberal law, FEN is no longer, may not be needed.
Okay, that's a very good comment from my wonderful better half, that FEN fills the gap. FEN is an individual case organization. You apply to FEN for their services on an individualized basis, and people who would not qualify in those states that have these laws might very well qualify for FEN's advice and information.
A couple quick questions. One is, you mentioned the lobbying effort taking place next week, and can you give us more details on that and how we get involved?
I believe that there might be information in one of the packets for Compassion and Choices, but if you go to their website, it will give you the dates, the times, and the places of where you can go and what they would hope you can do.
Also, there's another term that I'm not familiar with, that's MOLTER.
MOLT's medical orders on life-sustaining treatment. That's something that you fill out with your physician when you probably are looking at a finite life expectancy. So somebody in their middle 80s is not going to live forever. When I've talked about MOLT with my physician in the past, she has said, not yet. This time she said, okay, we'll look at it together. It's a 4-page or 5-page document. It's bright red, and you list all of the procedures that you would want, all of the procedures that you would not want, all of the contingency situations, how you would want them handled, and that becomes a part of your medical file. So that is an electronic part of your medical file, and when you have a critical illness or a situation that is life-threatening, that becomes the operative document that supposedly guides the treatments that you get. Now, of course, in the best case scenario, you also have your pit bull healthcare proxy there making sure that you get the best possible treatment to keep you comfortable under optimal conditions. Yes.
Just hit me. If you're in the hospital and you want to leave in that condition and go home, don't you have a right to say, if you're dying, you say, I want to go home? Oh,
yes, you certainly, right, if you are able to.
Send me home by ambulance, no, and I can get someone to help me in.
That is true. That is true. Yes, that you cannot be detained.
I had to learn that this is correct, that you can go home and I'm sorry.
And I'm by far not an expert like you or the gentleman there. Hi. But unfortunately, fortunately, what I learned with my mom is that if somebody near you calls an ambulance, the EMTs are obligated by law, even if they have your most, your living will, all of that, they're obligated to save you no matter what. And it's awful because my mother tried to commit suicide when she was very disabled, did it very correctly. And her husband walked in on her and called the ambulance because he couldn't handle it. And then she had to go to the hospital, even though everybody knew what she wanted. It was all documented 15 million times. And at the hospital, what shocked me, not only they kept saving her against her will, but they had, who was it, an observant. Did you know about that? That if somebody had tried to commit suicide and been found and was unsuccessful, the hospital considers it immediately mental illness, no matter what. So when I was with her all day long, they still had a gentleman or a woman sitting in the same room with us. No, I had no idea what they were there for. So a couple of times I asked that person to, I don't know, get a cup of water or something. And they said, call the nurse, I'm not there to do, I'm not allowed to do that. So after a couple of those things, I asked what their job was. And they were an assigned observer that had to be with her 24/7, even though I was there all the time, in order to prevent her from doing harm to herself. And this is the New York law. And even though I'm her healthcare proxy, and even though I was right there with her, I was not allowed to get rid of that person. So just be aware that the second, and again, it's all done with probably very humanitarian ideas, but in many cases it becomes counterproductive. So just be aware that EMTs by law have to save you. So whatever you do or whatever your loved one near you will do for you, make sure they don't call the ambulance if you don't want it. Please, thank you. Please, thank you.
It's documented that there is a very small percentage of people
Yeah.
who cannot retain the medicine. See, in Canada, it's physician or healthcare administered, and almost everybody does it that way. In the Oregon model, you have to do it yourself. So there's a small percentage of people that can't retain the medicine and they throw up. Okay, so imagine you're with your loved one, helping them, okay, and they throw up. They begin to get involved. What do? Do you call 911? And then, okay, that scenario kicks in. Or do you put a pillow over their head and kill them? Okay. So Canada, physician assisted, that doesn't happen. Nobody throws up in Canada. And by the way, you can't get a second dose. And when I told that to Amy Paulin, the supporter of the sponsor of the Assembly bill, she said to me, well, why can't you get a second dose? And I said, because the law doesn't allow it. It only has one.
I want to thank everybody for your time and comments. We seem to be out of questions now. There are some, Fred put some stuff in the chat that we'll share with other people about links to some of these informations. A couple of questions came up in the chat. What is FIN and what is SAD? And with that, if you could address those.
What is FIN?
FIN, Final Exit Network.
Final Exit Network. It is an organization that works with individuals and examines their need for information. We still have free speech in this country. It provides information on self-delivery, which is a euphemism for taking matters into your own hand and terminating your life. But you are the one who is receiving the information and carrying out the act. And FEN would have a doctor and a psychiatrist and a social worker determine that this was not an act of desperation, but a rational solution to an otherwise very, very sad situation.
And then the other comment was, what does SAD stand for? SADD. I'm only from Students Against Driving.
SADD is Students Against Drunk Driving. No?
The dementia.
I'm sorry, but I'm drawing a blank on that. I really do not know. Okay. I want to thank people for coming and those for tuning in via Zoom. I do urge you to go to the Compassion and Choices website to get their schedule for lobbying this coming week. This is a very important week. Calling or writing or texting various assemblymen and state senators to urge them to support the bills. Thank you.
Thank you.